Take your things and go. You've contributed nothing.
One day, you'll understand what you've done.
I made the biggest mistake of my life.
You lost me long before you learned my worth.
Daniel Mercer stood on the front porch holding a trash bag filled with his pregnant wife's clothes while rain soaked the driveway. 3 suitcases sat beside the curb. Beside them stood a stroller Emily had bought secondhand years earlier because she hated wasting money. Take your things and leave. Inside the house, another woman stood in the kitchen wearing Emily's robe. Emily Mercer was 7 months pregnant and carrying their first child. What Daniel didn't know was that less than 48 hours earlier, a team of trust attorneys had finalized paperwork placing control of a $10 billion family fortune in her hands. He believed he was finally cutting loose a wife who contributed nothing. In reality, he was standing in front of a house that legally belonged to her. And the cruelest part was that Emily still remembered a time when she believed he loved her for who she was. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. 6 months earlier, Emily still believed her marriage could be saved. Spring had just arrived in Connecticut. The trees along their quiet, suburban street were beginning to turn green again. The mornings were cool. The neighborhood was peaceful. From the outside, the Mercer family looked successful. Daniel drove a luxury SUV. Their house sat in a gated community. He worked in commercial real estate and often talked about upcoming deals. People assumed he was doing very well. Emily never corrected them. Most neighbors thought she was a stay-at-home wife with no career. Some probably assumed she depended entirely on her husband. Again, Emily never corrected them. She preferred it that way. Growing up, she had spent years surrounded by people who measured worth through money, family names, and social status. She had watched friendships form around wealth and disappear when fortunes changed. By the time she met Daniel, she had become tired of that world. She wanted something simple, something real. For years, she believed she had found it. That morning, she stood in the kitchen wearing leggings and an oversized sweater, preparing breakfast while Daniel checked emails on his phone. His attention barely left the screen. "Big meeting?" Emily asked. Daniel nodded. "Potential investors?" She smiled. "I hope it goes well." "Hopefully better than last quarter." The answer came with a hint of frustration. Emily noticed it. Lately, frustration seemed to follow him everywhere. At work, at dinner, even on weekends. The pressure in his industry had been increasing. Interest rates were changing. Projects were slowing. Investors were becoming cautious. Daniel rarely discussed details, but Emily could feel the stress. She placed a plate in front of him. He glanced at it briefly. "Thanks." The gratitude felt automatic, like a habit instead of a feeling. Before Emily could sit down, the front door opened. Margaret Mercer entered without knocking. She carried designer shopping bags and the confidence of someone who believed every room belonged to her. "Good morning," Emily said politely. Margaret barely acknowledged her. Her attention shifted immediately toward her son. "Daniel, did you call the Henderson Group? I'm handling it. You need stronger contacts," Margaret replied. "Everyone else is moving forward while you're carrying unnecessary weight." Emily knew what that meant. Margaret rarely criticized her directly anymore. She had become more subtle with age, or perhaps more skilled. Daniel remained silent. That silence hurt more than the words. Margaret finally turned toward Emily. Still at home, Emily smiled lightly. "I'm helping Daniel while he focuses on work." Margaret laughed softly. "That's one way to describe it." The room grew quiet. Emily focused on her coffee. Years earlier, comments like that would have started arguments. Now she simply let them pass. Not because they didn't hurt, because she was tired. A few hours later, after Daniel left for work, Emily drove into Hartford for an appointment. The office occupied the top floor of an old stone building overlooking the river. Most people would have assumed she was visiting an accountant or financial planner. The truth was much bigger. Inside a private conference room, 3 people waited. A trust attorney, a senior advisor from her family's office, and a wealth manager she had known since childhood. The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours. Documents covered the table, asset reports, trust structures, governance paperwork, generations of family wealth carefully organized across dozens of entities. Emily listened quietly. She always found these meetings uncomfortable, not because they were complicated, because they reminded her of a life she had spent years trying to escape. When the meeting ended, her attorney closed a folder. "We're entering the final phase." Emily looked up. "What does that mean exactly? The transition should be completed before the baby arrives." She nodded slowly. Her grandfather's estate had been tied up in legal administration for months after his death. Now the process was nearly finished. Soon she would become the controlling beneficiary of a family trust worth more money than most people could imagine. Only a handful of people knew the full number. Daniel was not one of them. The attorney studied her carefully. "Have you told your husband yet?" Emily looked toward the window. Cars moved below. People rushed through ordinary afternoons. "No." The advisor exchanged a glance with the attorney. "Do you plan to eventually?" "Why wait?" Emily hesitated, because the answer felt embarrassing. Because after 7 years of marriage, she still wanted reassurance that should not have been necessary. "I want to know who loves me before they know what I have." Nobody spoke. The attorney finally nodded. "That's understandable." As Emily gathered her purse and prepared to leave, her phone vibrated. A text from Daniel. "Running late, dinner without me. Nothing more, no heart emoji, no apology. Just 6 words. Emily stared at the message longer than she should have. Then another notification appeared. This one came from her attorney. "Confidential update. Final trust transfer scheduled for completion before expected delivery date." Emily's heartbeat slowed. Something important had just moved one step closer, and she had no idea that by the time those documents became effective, her marriage would already be breaking apart. The next morning, Daniel left before sunrise. Emily heard the garage door open while she was still in bed, one hand resting over the small curve of her stomach. He did not kiss her goodbye. He did not leave a note. He only sent a text after he was already gone. "Early meeting. Don't wait up tonight." Emily stared at the screen until it dimmed in her hand. There had been a time when Daniel would tell her everything. A difficult client, a delayed closing, a lender backing out. He used to come home and drop his head into her lap like the world had been too heavy to carry alone. She had held that weight with him, quietly, gladly. Now he carried his problems somewhere else. Daniel Mercer arrived at the offices of Mercer Lane Development just after 7. The company occupied half a floor in a glass building downtown, nice enough to impress visitors, not large enough to hide trouble. His name was on the door, but lately that name felt heavier than an honor. 2 projects were behind schedule. One private lender had paused funding. A hotel redevelopment deal in Stamford was draining cash faster than expected. Daniel had not told Emily the full truth. He told himself he was protecting her from stress, especially with the pregnancy. But deep down, that was not the real reason. He hated the idea of admitting weakness to a wife who stayed home in soft sweaters, folded baby clothes, and asked gentle questions he no longer had the patience to answer. By late morning, he was sitting across from Vanessa Cole in a conference room overlooking the city. Vanessa worked as a luxury development consultant, though she made the title sound larger than it was. She knew investors' hotel groups, wealthy families, and people who liked feeling important. Daniel had met her through a project pitch 2 months earlier, and from the first meeting she had known exactly how to speak to the part of him that felt unseen. "You're underselling yourself," Vanessa said, sliding a folder across the table. "That's your real problem." Daniel leaned back, tired but listening. "I'm overleveraged," he said. "That's the problem." No, she replied, calm and certain. You're surrounded by people who make you think small. There's a difference. He looked up. Vanessa smiled just enough to make the comment feel personal. Men at your level need an environment that reflects where they're going, she continued. Investors notice everything. Your home, your spouse, your circle. Whether you look like a man building something serious or a man being dragged backward by domestic chaos. Daniel should have pushed back. He should have said Emily was pregnant, that she had supported him for years, that she had given up pieces of herself so he could chase deals that sometimes paid off and sometimes did not. Instead, he said nothing. Vanessa took his silence as permission. I'm not judging, she said softly. I'm just saying image matters. Your competitors understand that. Their wives host dinners, make introductions, sit on charity boards, look the part. They don't show up in grocery store cardigans acting like the world is too much. Daniel's jaw tightened. Emily had worn a cardigan like that to his last small investor dinner because she had been nauseous and cold. She had still helped prepare the house, still smiled through a headache, still remembered every guest's dietary preference. But what Daniel remembered now was the way one investor's wife had looked her up and down. He hated that he remembered. Vanessa leaned closer. I can help you get in rooms you should already be in, she said, but you need to stop apologizing for wanting more. Those words stayed with him all day. By evening, Daniel was not at home. He was at a rooftop lounge in West Hartford, sitting beside Vanessa while city lights flickered below them. It was supposed to be a strategy drink after a meeting. That was what he told himself. Then one drink became two. Vanessa laughed at his jokes. She touched his arm when she spoke. She listened as if every frustration in his life proved he was destined for something better. My mother thinks Emily never understood ambition, Daniel admitted. Vanessa looked at him carefully. And do you? He stared into his glass. I think she stopped trying. It was not fair. Part of him knew that. Emily had not stopped trying. She had simply tried in ways that did not show up on balance sheets. She kept his life smooth. She handled appointments, meals, family birthdays, quiet emergencies. She remembered things he forgot and forgave things he never apologized for. But Vanessa did not ask about that. She only tilted her head and said, That must be lonely. Daniel felt something loosen in his chest. Not love, not yet. Something more dangerous. Permission. At home, Emily ate dinner alone. She reheated soup, sat at the kitchen island, and left Daniel's portion covered on the stove. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the rain tapping lightly against the windows. Her phone buzzed once. A message from Margaret. Daniel needs focus right now. Please don't burden him with emotional demands. Men under pressure need peace, not another dependent. Emily read it twice. Then she placed the phone face down. Her eyes burned, but she did not cry. She had grown up around people who could insult with perfect manners. Margaret's cruelty was not new. What hurt was that Daniel kept allowing it. Later that night, close to midnight, Daniel came home smelling faintly of expensive perfume and whiskey. Emily was sitting in the living room with a folded baby blanket in her lap. You're still awake, he said, surprised rather than concerned. I wanted to make sure you got home safely. He loosened his tie. You don't have to monitor me. The words landed cold. Emily looked at him, really looked. The tiredness in his face was real. So was the distance. Something about him had shifted like a door inside him had opened somewhere else and closed here. I'm not monitoring you, Daniel, she said quietly. I'm your wife. He exhaled, irritated. I know what you are. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then his phone lit up on the counter. Emily saw only part of the message before he grabbed it. Vanessa Cole. Tonight was exactly what you needed. Next time, let me take you somewhere people actually understand your future. Daniel turned the screen down too quickly. Emily said nothing. But for the first time, the silence in the house did not feel like patience. It felt like warning. Emily did not mention the message. The next morning, she acted as if she had never seen Vanessa's name on Daniel's phone. She made coffee. She packed a small lunch for him. She asked whether he wanted the navy tie or the gray one for an investor presentation. Daniel answered without looking up. His distance had become routine. That somehow made it worse. People expected betrayal to arrive like a storm, loud, obvious, impossible to miss. But most marriages did not break that way. Sometimes they unraveled one unanswered question at a time. 3 weeks passed. Daniel spent more evenings away from home. Business dinners, networking events, last-minute meetings. The explanations sounded reasonable. The problem was that they sounded exactly the same every time. Emily noticed other things too. A new passcode on his phone. Private calls taken outside. Bank notifications arriving at odd hours. Credit card charges from restaurants Daniel claimed he had never visited. None of it proved anything. Together, it painted a picture she did not want to see. One afternoon, she sat in her obstetrician's office waiting for a routine appointment. The baby was healthy, growing normally. The doctor advised more rest and less stress. Emily almost laughed. Less stress felt impossible lately. After the appointment, she walked slowly toward the parking garage. Her phone rang. Daniel. For a brief moment, hope appeared. Maybe he was checking on the baby. Maybe he missed her. Instead, his voice sounded rushed. "I need you to move some money from savings." Emily frowned. For what temporary cash flow issue? Business, just do it, Emily. The irritation arrived instantly. No explanation, no discussion, just expectation. She stared at the concrete floor beneath her feet. "How much? 25,000? Emily hesitated. Years ago, she would have transferred it immediately. Now something felt wrong. "Can I see the numbers first?" Silence. Then a cold response. "You don't understand this stuff." The words stung more than they should have. Not because they were cruel. Because Daniel genuinely believed them. He had no idea she spent part of every quarter reviewing financial reports larger than most companies would ever see. He had no idea trust attorneys regularly consulted her regarding investment structures, tax exposure, and governance matters. To him, she was simply a dependent wife. Someone protected from complicated things. Someone who needed him. "Forget it," Daniel said. "I'll handle it." The call ended. Emily stood alone in the parking garage, listening to the empty silence. For the first time, she wondered whether Daniel actually wanted a partner anymore, or whether he simply wanted obedience. A week later, she got her answer. A charity fundraiser for a children's hospital brought together local business leaders, investors, and community organizations. Daniel insisted they attend. "Good networking opportunity," he said. Emily chose a simple black maternity dress and arrived beside her husband, smiling politely, despite feeling exhausted. The ballroom buzzed with conversation. Within minutes, Daniel disappeared into a crowd of investors. Emily wandered toward a refreshment table. That was when she saw her. Vanessa Cole. Tall, elegant, confident. The same woman from the text message. She stood beside Daniel, laughing at something he had said. Her hand rested casually on his arm. Not for a second, not by accident, long enough to communicate ownership. Emily felt something tighten in her chest. Daniel noticed her watching. For an instant, guilt crossed his face. Then it vanished. He walked toward Emily. "Vanessa's helping with one of our developments," he explained. Emily looked at him. Just looked. No accusations, no scene, no public embarrassment. That somehow made him more uncomfortable. Vanessa extended her hand. "Nice to finally meet you." Emily shook it. "Likewise." Vanessa smiled politely, but there was something underneath it. Confidence, possession, a belief that she was already winning a competition Emily never agreed to enter. Throughout the evening, Vanessa remained close to Daniel. Too close. Every conversation seemed designed to highlight status, ambition, success. At one point, Emily overheard Margaret speaking with another investor's wife. Daniel has tremendous potential, Margaret said proudly. He just needs people around him who understand growth. The woman's eyes drifted toward Emily. Margaret did not correct the implication. She didn't need to. The damage was already done. Later that night, back at home, Emily stood in the nursery folding baby clothes. Daniel entered quietly. "We need to talk." Those words rarely brought good news. Emily continued folding. "Okay." Daniel rubbed his forehead. "You've been acting distant." For a moment, she almost laughed. The irony felt unbelievable. "I've been acting distant." He ignored the question. "The pregnancy has changed things." Emily slowly lowered the tiny blue blanket in her hands. "What exactly are you saying? I'm saying we're different people now." Fear entered the room. Small at first, then larger, more real. Emily looked at the man she had loved for 7 years, the man she believed knew her better than anyone. Suddenly he felt like a stranger. That night she barely slept. The next morning she did something she never imagined doing. She scheduled a consultation with a family attorney, not because she wanted a divorce, because she no longer felt safe being the only person in the marriage who still believed in it. 2 days later, she sat across from attorney Rebecca Lawson in a quiet office overlooking downtown Hartford. Rebecca reviewed financial statements Emily had brought, account records, property documents, insurance paperwork, transaction histories. She asked careful questions. Then she became very quiet. Emily noticed immediately. "What is it?" Rebecca looked down at one particular document, then back up. Her expression had completely changed. "Mrs. Mercer," she said carefully, "there's something I need to ask." Emily felt her stomach tighten. Rebecca tapped a page sitting near the center of the table. "Does your husband know who actually owns the house?" Emily stared at Rebecca Lawson across the conference table. For a moment she thought she had misunderstood the question. "Owns the house?" she asked quietly. Rebecca slid a property document closer. "Yes." Emily looked down at the page. The legal language meant little to her at first glance. She recognized the address immediately. Their address. The house where she and Daniel had spent 7 years building a life together. The nursery where she had just folded tiny baby blankets. The kitchen where she had cooked dinners that often went cold while waiting for him to come home. Rebecca tapped a section near the bottom. "This property isn't titled in your husband's name." Emily frowned. "What do you mean, legally the property is held through a trust structure?" Emily leaned forward. The attorney continued. "The trust appears to have been established by your grandfather years ago. The beneficial ownership transferred to you under a protected arrangement. Based on these documents, the property was never marital property, in the traditional sense." The room felt strangely quiet. Emily remembered signing stacks of paperwork after her grandfather's death. Most of it had been handled through attorneys and advisors. She had trusted the process, trusted the people involved. She had never imagined it would matter someday. "Daniel thinks he owns the house," she said. Rebecca's expression softened. "That may be what he believes." Emily looked back at the document. The realization felt surreal. Not because of the money, because she suddenly understood how little attention she had paid to things she assumed would never become important between husband and wife. Trust, ownership, protection. Those things felt unnecessary when love existed. Now she wasn't so sure. Over the following week, Rebecca reviewed additional records. The deeper they looked, the more concerning things became. Daniel had moved several accounts. He had separated business funds from personal accounts without discussion. Some household expenses were being redirected. Nothing illegal, not yet, but enough to suggest preparation for something bigger. When Emily returned home that evening, Daniel was sitting in the living room reviewing spreadsheets on his laptop. The television played silently in the background. For a moment, she simply watched him, the familiar slope of his shoulders, the concentration on his face, the man she once knew so completely. Long day, she asked. Every day is a long day lately. She sat carefully on the opposite side of the couch. You seem stressed. Daniel laughed humorlessly. You think she waited? Eventually, he closed the laptop. The market is a mess. Financing costs are rising. Investors are nervous. Everybody wants guarantees. You'll figure it out. That's easy to say. The answer landed harder than he intended. Emily felt it immediately. So did he. But instead of apologizing, Daniel continued. You don't understand what it's like. There it was again. The assumption. The certainty that she lived in some sheltered world untouched by responsibility. Emily could have corrected him. She could have explained the quarterly meetings with attorneys, the trust reports, the investment reviews, the enormous decisions quietly happening in the background. Instead, she remained silent. Daniel interpreted her silence as proof. Proof that she had nothing meaningful to contribute. Later that night, his phone rang. Vanessa. Emily saw the name. Daniel stepped outside to answer. The conversation lasted nearly 30 minutes. When he returned, his mood had changed completely. He seemed energized, focused, alive. The contrast hurt more than the secrecy, because it meant somebody else was giving him something he no longer accepted from her. The next Saturday, Margaret invited them to lunch at a country club. Emily considered declining. Instead, she went. She still hoped things could improve. The lunch began politely enough. Then Margaret started asking questions. How's the nursery almost finished? Emily replied. And after the baby, Emily smiled. We'll figure things out. Margaret nodded. Then came the comment she had clearly prepared beforehand. You know, most women eventually want something of their own. Emily remained calm. I'll always have something of my own. Margaret laughed lightly. What exactly? The table went quiet. Daniel looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. Margaret continued. A career, income, independence, some contribution beyond decorating rooms and shopping for baby clothes. Emily stared at the glass of water in front of her. The words themselves weren't new. The humiliation came from Daniel's silence. Again he allowed it. Again he chose comfort over loyalty. Finally, Emily set down her fork. I contribute more than you realize. Margaret smiled. I'm sure you believe that. The conversation moved on. But the damage remained. That night after they returned home, Daniel and Emily barely spoke. The distance between them seemed larger than the walls around them. Hours later, Emily sat alone in the nursery. Moonlight spilled through the window. Her hand rested against her stomach. The baby kicked gently. A small reminder that some things still mattered. Her phone buzzed. An encrypted message from the family office. The subject line immediately caught her attention. Urgent trust transition update. Emily opened it. Attached was a valuation summary prepared by attorneys overseeing the final transfer. She scanned the first page, then stopped breathing. The estimated value listed at the bottom exceeded every number she had previously been shown. Far exceeded it. A follow-up meeting had been scheduled immediately. Final beneficiary authorization required. Transfer completion pending. Emily stared at the screen for a long moment. Somewhere downstairs, Daniel slept peacefully convinced she depended entirely on him. He had no idea that a legal reality existed beneath his assumptions, and he had no idea that the foundation of his certainty was about to crack. Emily did not tell Daniel about the trust valuation. She did not mention the attorneys. She did not mention the ownership documents. She did not mention the fact that a team of financial advisors now called her several times a week regarding decisions that would affect assets spread across multiple states. Instead, she continued living exactly as she always had. She attended doctor's appointments. She prepared the nursery. She cooked dinner when she felt well enough. And every day Daniel became a little more distant. By late autumn, her pregnancy had entered its final trimester. The doctor ordered reduced activity after a brief scare involving elevated blood pressure. Nothing critical, but enough to require caution. Emily followed instructions carefully. Daniel barely noticed. When she returned home from one appointment, she found Margaret sitting at the kitchen island drinking coffee. Daniel wasn't home. Margaret looked around the room as if inspecting property. "You've gained more weight than I expected." Emily set her purse down slowly. "I'm pregnant." Margaret shrugged. That's not an excuse for everything. Normally, Emily would have ignored the comment. Today she was tired. Exhausted, actually. "Did you come here for a reason?" Margaret smiled. "I came to check on my future grandchild." The answer sounded reasonable. The expression behind it did not. A few minutes later, Margaret revealed the real purpose of the visit. "You know Daniel deserves support right now." Emily looked up. "I do support him?" "No," Margaret said. "You comfort him. That's different." The older woman leaned forward. "Support means helping him grow, helping him move upward." Emily already knew where the conversation was going. Margaret continued anyway. "Sometimes love means recognizing when you're no longer the right partner." The words landed softly. That made them worse. Because they sounded rehearsed. Emily felt a chill move through her chest. For the first time, she wondered if these conversations were happening elsewhere. Between Margaret and Daniel. Between Margaret and someone else. Perhaps even between Margaret and Vanessa. After Margaret left, Emily sat alone in the kitchen for nearly an hour. Outside, rain tapped against the windows. Inside, the silence felt heavier than usual. Her phone vibrated. A message from Daniel. Working late. Again. Nothing more. No question about the baby. No question about her appointment. No question about how she was feeling. Emily stared at the screen. Then she quietly deleted the message. Not because she was angry, because she was tired of rereading evidence that she no longer mattered. 3 days later, another piece of the truth appeared. Daniel claimed he was attending a development meeting in New Haven. The explanation sounded believable. The problem was that Emily unexpectedly saw him elsewhere. She had stopped at a pharmacy to pick up medication. As she exited the store, she noticed a familiar black SUV parked across the street. Daniel's SUV. At first, she assumed it was coincidence. Then she saw him. And Vanessa. They emerged from an upscale restaurant together. Not a business lunch, not a professional meeting. They looked comfortable. Familiar. Vanessa laughed at something he said. Daniel touched the small of her back as they crossed toward the parking lot. The gesture lasted only a second. A tiny movement. But some betrayals did not require proof. The body understood before the mind accepted it. Emily stood frozen beside her car. The world around her continued normally. Traffic moved. People entered stores. Someone pushed a stroller across the sidewalk. Meanwhile, her marriage quietly broke apart in front of her eyes. She left before they could see her. That evening, Daniel came home carrying takeout containers. An unusual gesture, almost guilty. "Thought you might like Thai food," he said. Emily looked at him. He smiled. The same smile she had trusted for years. The same smile he had likely worn hours earlier while sitting across from another woman. For a moment, she considered confronting him. Demanding honesty. Demanding respect. Demanding an explanation. Instead, she asked one question. How was New Haven? The lie came easily, productive. Emily nodded. Nothing more. Something changed inside her then. Not anger, acceptance, the most dangerous stage of heartbreak, when hope finally starts letting go. Over the following weeks, Daniel's behavior became bolder, more careless, more entitled. Vanessa's influence was no longer hidden. Her name surfaced repeatedly during conversations about projects and investors. Daniel praised her constantly, her connections, her intelligence, her vision. Every compliment felt like a comparison. One evening, while reviewing household accounts, Emily noticed something else. Several automatic transfers had changed. Joint funds were being moved. Access permissions had been modified. Certain financial statements no longer appeared in shared records. Nothing illegal. Not yet. But deliberate. Very deliberate. Rebecca Lawson reviewed the documents the next morning. The attorney's expression darkened immediately. He's preparing. Emily already knew. For divorce, Rebecca paused. Possibly. At minimum, he's positioning himself for separation. The words hurt. Even after everything. Even after Vanessa. Even after months of emotional abandonment. Some part of Emily still wanted to be wrong. Rebecca closed the folder. There's something else. Emily looked up. What? The attorney slid another document across the table. Property records. Trust records. Ownership filings. More evidence connected to the house. Rebecca pointed toward a specific section. The ownership structure is even stronger than we originally believed. Emily frowned. What does that mean? It means if your husband thinks this house belongs to him... Rebecca stopped. Then she finished the sentence carefully. He's making decisions based on a very dangerous misunderstanding. That same evening, Daniel walked through the front door carrying a folder. A thick folder. Legal paper protruded from one side. Emily immediately recognized the logo printed across the top. A family law firm. Daniel noticed her looking. For one brief second, guilt flashed across his face. Then it disappeared. And Emily realized the moment she had feared for months had finally arrived. Daniel set the folder on the dining table and stood there for several seconds before speaking. The house felt unnaturally quiet. Emily remained seated across from him, one hand resting protectively over her stomach. Neither of them looked away. Finally, Daniel pulled out a stack of papers. We need to discuss our future. The sentence sounded practiced, rehearsed, like something he had repeated in front of a mirror before walking through the front door. Emily already knew what was coming. Still hearing it hurt. I think separation is the best option, Daniel said. There it was. The word neither of them had spoken aloud until now. Separation. Not counseling. Not rebuilding. Not trying. Ending. Emily felt her chest tighten, but her voice remained calm. Is this about Vanessa? A flicker crossed Daniel's face. Gone almost instantly. This isn't about another person. The lie arrived too quickly. Emily noticed. So did he. But neither acknowledged it. Daniel pushed the papers toward her. I'm trying to handle this fairly. Emily glanced down. Temporary separation terms, financial disclosures, property expectations, recommendations from a family law firm. She continued reading. Then she stopped. Several assumptions filled the document. Assumptions that Emily depended entirely on Daniel. Assumptions that major assets belonged exclusively to him. Assumptions that he controlled the future. Rebecca had been right. Daniel wasn't merely preparing. He had already constructed an entire narrative, one where Emily had no leverage, no resources, no options. You've thought about this for a while, Emily said quietly. Daniel looked away. That doesn't matter. It matters to me. For a moment, guilt appeared in his expression. Then the familiar defensiveness returned. I've carried everything for years, Emily. The words hit harder than the divorce papers. Everything. As if she had contributed nothing. As if her support had no value because it never appeared on a paycheck. As if pregnancy sacrifice, loyalty, and emotional labor somehow counted less. You believe that? She asked, softly. Daniel sighed. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Again, the same sentence, the same excuse, the same blind spot. Emily folded the papers carefully. Not angrily, not dramatically, just carefully. That seemed to frustrate him, more than tears would have. Say something, Daniel demanded. She looked at him. I don't recognize you anymore. Silence settled between them, heavy, final. 3 days later, Vanessa stopped pretending. Emily arrived home from a prenatal appointment and found a luxury gift bag sitting on the kitchen island. Inside was a bottle of expensive wine and a handwritten note. Looking forward to celebrating the next chapter. No explanation, no attempt to hide it. Nothing. Emily stared at the card for several seconds. Then she placed it back inside the bag and walked upstairs. She was tired of chasing answers. The answers were already standing in front of her. Meanwhile, Daniel's behavior continued changing. He spent fewer nights at home. His calls became secretive. His patience disappeared completely. Even small disagreements escalated into irritation. One evening he snapped because dinner wasn't ready, another because Emily forgot to forward an email. The incidents themselves were minor. The contempt behind them wasn't. Margaret's involvement grew worse. She visited frequently now, almost as if she sensed victory approaching. One afternoon she entered the nursery uninvited while Emily organized baby clothes. Margaret examined the room, then smiled. "It's beautiful." Emily nodded politely. "It still needs a few things, perhaps not for long." Emily looked up. "What does that mean?" Margaret folded her arms. "Daniel deserves a fresh start. Everyone can see that except you." The cruelty felt deliberate, calculated. Emily slowly placed a folded blanket inside a drawer. "You seem very invested in ending my marriage." Margaret didn't even deny it, "because I love my son." "No," Emily replied quietly, "because you love who you want him to become." The older woman said nothing, but her expression hardened. For the first time, Emily had pushed back, not loudly, not emotionally, just truthfully, and Margaret hated it. The following week brought another development. Rebecca requested an urgent meeting. Emily arrived expecting more paperwork. Instead, she found 2 additional attorneys sitting beside Rebecca. Property specialists, trust specialists, experts. The sight immediately raised concern. Rebecca opened a file. "We found additional records." Emily listened carefully. "Your grandfather didn't only protect the trust." A document slid across the table. "The house was transferred through a protected structure years before your marriage." Emily studied the paperwork. Meaning nobody can simply decide what happens to this property. Rebecca paused, then continued carefully. "Especially someone who doesn't actually own it." The room grew quiet. One attorney opened another file. Inside were recent financial inquiries connected to Daniel, loan requests, asset representations, property-related references, nothing criminal, but enough to alarm experienced lawyers. Emily's stomach tightened. He used the house possibly as part of discussions regarding future financing. Rebecca's expression darkened. "And that creates problems." A long silence followed. For the first time, Emily fully understood the scale of Daniel's misunderstanding. He wasn't just underestimating her. He was making major life decisions based on facts that weren't true, and he still had absolutely no idea. As the meeting ended, Rebecca handed over one final envelope. "What's this updated trust valuation?" Emily opened it. Her eyes moved across the page, then stopped. The final transfer was complete. The beneficiary listed at the top was her. The value beneath it exceeded $10 billion. Officially, legally, irrevocably. Emily stared at the number while a strange calm settled over her. Outside the conference room, her phone vibrated. A text message from Daniel. "We need to talk tonight. Big changes are coming." Emily looked at the message, then at the valuation report in her hands. For the first time, she suspected those changes were about to be far bigger than Daniel could possibly imagine. Daniel waited until after dinner. Not because he wanted to spare Emily, because he wanted control of the conversation. The folder remained on the kitchen counter the entire evening, like a warning neither of them acknowledged. When the dishes were finished and the house had settled into silence, he finally carried the paperwork into the living room. Emily already knew what was inside. She sat calmly across from him. That calmness unsettled him. He had expected tears, questions, anger. Instead, she simply waited. Daniel cleared his throat. I spoke with an attorney. I know. His eyes narrowed slightly. You know, the law firm's logo wasn't exactly hidden. For a moment, he seemed irritated that she wasn't reacting the way he expected. I think divorce is the right path. There it was. Not separation, not counseling. Divorce. The final word. Emily lowered her eyes briefly, not because she was surprised, because hearing it still hurt. 7 years of marriage reduced to a sentence. Their child had not even been born yet. What changed? She asked quietly. Daniel looked away. Neither of them mentioned Vanessa. Neither needed to. I don't think we're compatible anymore. The explanation sounded clean, respectable. The kind people repeated when they wanted to avoid uncomfortable truths. Emily nodded slowly. If that's what you believe. Daniel pushed the documents toward her. I've already had preliminary terms prepared. Emily opened the folder. Property division, financial recommendations, living arrangements, future support calculations. Every page carried the same assumption, that Daniel possessed the resources, and Emily depended on them. The imbalance was so complete it almost felt surreal. Your attorney drafted this based on information you provided, yes. Emily continued reading. The proposed settlement treated her like someone with no meaningful assets, no independent wealth, no leverage, no alternatives. Daniel watched her carefully. He mistook her silence for weakness. What he couldn't see was that Rebecca and 3 separate trust attorneys had already reviewed far more substantial documents than these. What are you thinking? He asked. Emily closed the folder. I think you've made a lot of assumptions. Daniel laughed softly. About what? Almost everything she thought. Instead, she simply said, about our marriage. His expression hardened. The discussion ended there. Neither changed the other's mind. Over the next 2 weeks, the atmosphere inside the house deteriorated rapidly. Daniel spent most evenings away. Sometimes he claimed business meetings, sometimes networking events, sometimes nothing at all. Eventually, he stopped explaining. The absence became normal. One afternoon, Emily returned from a medical appointment and found an unfamiliar coat hanging near the front door. Women's designer brand. Definitely not hers. She stared at it for several seconds, then heard laughter coming from the kitchen. Vanessa. The sound immediately tightened something inside her chest. Emily followed it slowly. When she entered the room, Vanessa stood beside the island, drinking coffee. Coffee from Emily's favorite mug. Daniel stood nearby, reviewing something on his tablet. For a moment, nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The scene felt absurdly intimate, like Emily had walked into someone else's house. Vanessa recovered first. Her smile appeared instantly. Polished? Confident? I didn't realize you'd be home this early. The words were polite. The message underneath them wasn't. Daniel looked uncomfortable, but only briefly. Vanessa stopped by to discuss an investor presentation. Emily glanced around the kitchen. No presentation materials, no laptop, no conference documents. Only coffee. Conversation, comfort. I see. That was all she said. She walked past them and headed upstairs. Behind her, silence filled the room. The humiliation followed her all the way to the bedroom. Not because Vanessa had been there, because Daniel had allowed it. Because he had chosen convenience over respect. Again. That night, Daniel didn't apologize. He acted as though nothing unusual had happened. The following weekend became worse. Margaret hosted a family gathering at her home. Emily attended because avoiding the event would only create additional conflict. Several relatives arrived, friends of the family, neighbors. people who had known Daniel for years. Vanessa appeared halfway through the afternoon. Nobody looked surprised. That was the most painful part. The introductions felt natural, expected, prepared. Margaret practically glowed while speaking to her. Vanessa has been incredibly helpful to Daniel lately. Emily stood only a few feet away, invisible. One relative smiled toward Vanessa. "You make a great team." Margaret didn't correct him. Neither did Daniel. The implication remained hanging in the air. Emily felt dozens of eyes shift toward her. Pity, curiosity, judgment. The humiliation wasn't dramatic. Nobody shouted. Nobody insulted her directly. Real humiliation rarely worked that way. Sometimes it arrived through silence, through omission, through being quietly replaced while everyone pretended not to notice. Later that evening, Emily left early. The drive home felt longer than usual. Her phone rang halfway there. Rebecca Lawson. Emily answered immediately. "Is everything okay?" "Actually, yes." The attorney sounded unusually serious. "We completed another review of the property records." Emily pulled into a parking lot and listened carefully. "And there's absolutely no ambiguity." A pause followed. Then Rebecca continued. "The ownership structure is airtight. The house belongs to the trust. Daniel has no ownership interest whatsoever." Emily closed her eyes briefly. Not because she cared about winning, because she finally understood how vulnerable Daniel's assumptions truly were. "He still believes the house is his," Emily said. "I know, and he may try acting on that belief." Another pause. Longer this time. "That's exactly what concerns us." When Emily returned home later that night, the house was dark. Daniel wasn't there. A text message waited on her phone. "Staying elsewhere tonight? Need space? No explanation, no apology. Nothing." Emily looked around the empty house. The nursery upstairs, the baby clothes, the framed wedding photo still hanging near the staircase, a marriage slowly disappearing. Her phone vibrated again. This time the message came from Rebecca. Attached was a newly filed legal notice. Emily opened the document. Her heart sank. Across the top sat the name of Daniel's attorney, and beneath it was a formal request seeking exclusive possession of the marital residence during divorce proceedings. Emily read the legal notice 3 times before setting her phone down. Exclusive possession of the marital residence. The request itself was not unusual in a divorce. The assumption behind it was, Daniel genuinely believed the house belonged to him. He was asking a court to remove Emily from a property he had never actually owned. The irony would have been almost funny if it had not hurt so much. The next morning, Rebecca called before 8. "Do not respond emotionally," she advised. "I wasn't planning to. I know. That's why I'm telling you to keep doing exactly what you're doing." Emily stood in the nursery while sunlight spilled across the crib. "What happens now? We document everything. Every communication, every financial move, every request." Emily nodded. For months she had felt powerless. Now she understood something important. Power and control were not the same thing. Daniel had been exercising control. The actual power sat quietly inside legal documents he had never bothered to read. Over the following weeks, the divorce accelerated. Formal filings appeared. Financial disclosures were exchanged. Attorneys became involved in nearly every conversation. Daniel moved into a luxury apartment downtown. Officially, he claimed he needed space during the proceedings. Unofficially, Emily suspected Vanessa had become part of the reason. She stopped trying to confirm it. The truth no longer required proof. One afternoon, Rebecca requested another meeting. This time, several unfamiliar people joined them. A forensic accountant, a trust administrator, 2 representatives from the family office. The atmosphere immediately felt different, more serious, more strategic. The accountant opened a folder. "We've identified several concerns." Emily listened quietly. Your husband appears to have represented certain assets as available collateral during financing discussions. Rebecca slid additional documents across the table. Nothing finalized, no fraud, but several statements create significant exposure if challenged. Emily studied the pages: property references, asset summaries, loan discussions. The house appeared repeatedly, a house Daniel did not own. Her stomach tightened. He used it, potentially to strengthen financing negotiations, the accountant replied. Does he know he's wrong? Nobody answered immediately. Finally, Rebecca spoke. We don't believe he understands the ownership structure. Emily looked down at the paperwork. That was the tragedy of it. Not ignorance itself, confidence built on ignorance. Daniel had spent months making decisions while believing he possessed leverage he never actually had. Meanwhile, Daniel's situation continued deteriorating. One investor withdrew from a project. Another demanded additional documentation. Financing timelines slipped, costs increased, pressure mounted. Instead of stepping back, Daniel doubled down. Vanessa encouraged it, at least according to messages later obtained during disclosure requests. She repeatedly assured him bigger opportunities waited ahead, that his future would improve once the divorce was finished, that he needed people who matched his ambition. The promises sounded attractive. Reality was proving more expensive. Several weeks later, Emily attended a settlement conference with her attorneys. Daniel arrived with his legal team. Vanessa wasn't present, but her influence filled the room anyway. Daniel looked tired. Older somehow. Stress had carved new lines into his face, yet arrogance remained. He greeted Emily politely, distantly, like someone discussing a business dispute rather than the collapse of a marriage. Negotiations began. Property, support, custody planning after the baby arrived. Then the conversation shifted toward the house. Daniel's attorney confidently referenced future occupancy arrangements. Rebecca allowed him to finish, then calmly placed several documents on the table. Trust records, ownership filings, property structures. The attorney's expression changed almost immediately. Daniel noticed. What is it? His lawyer scanned another page, then another. A long silence followed. The first crack appeared. Small, but unmistakable. We may need additional review, his attorney said carefully. Daniel frowned. Review of what no one answered directly. Not yet. It wasn't the right venue, not the final reveal. But for the first time, uncertainty entered the room. Emily saw it happen. And strangely, she felt no satisfaction, only sadness, because this man had once been her best friend. Because none of this had needed to happen. Because pride had led him somewhere facts never would have allowed. After the meeting ended, Daniel followed her into the parking garage. What's going on? He asked. Emily turned toward him. What do you mean my attorney is suddenly acting like there's a problem? 1,000 responses crossed her mind. Instead, she chose honesty. There are things you never bothered to understand. The words lingered between them. Daniel's frustration surfaced immediately. You always do this. Do what? Act like you're hiding something. Emily almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was astonishing. For months he had hidden another woman, prepared divorce filings, moved money, made assumptions about her life. And now he accused her of secrecy. She simply shook her head, then walked away. That evening she returned home and found a courier envelope waiting at the front door. Marked confidential. Family office priority. Inside sat a formal notice from the Trust Administration Board. Final certification complete. Beneficiary authority activated. Additional disclosure package enclosed. Emily opened the attached valuation report. Even after seeing it before, the number still felt unreal. More than $10 billion. Fully transferred, fully protected, fully hers. At that exact moment across town, Daniel received a message from his attorney. "We need to talk immediately. This situation is much larger than we initially believed." And for the first time since filing for divorce, Daniel felt a flicker of genuine concern. By the time the divorce was finalized, winter had settled over Connecticut. The courtroom reveal had changed everything. Daniel had learned the truth in the worst possible way. The house he tried to claim was never his. The trust he dismissed as irrelevant controlled assets worth more than $10 billion. The wife he had treated like a dependent had been the beneficiary of a family empire all along. Yet none of that had hurt him as much as realizing when he had lost her. Not in court, not when the valuation reports appeared, not when the attorneys exposed the ownership records. He had lost her months earlier, the moment he stopped respecting her, the moment he chose admiration from strangers over loyalty at home, the moment he made her feel alone while carrying their child. Emily gave birth several weeks later. The delivery was difficult, but successful. When she finally held her son for the first time, the noise of the legal battles disappeared. The property disputes, the financial disclosures, the headlines circulating through business circles after the net worth reveal. None of it mattered in that hospital room. Her son wrapped his tiny fingers around hers. For the first time in a very long while, Emily felt completely at peace. The house eventually became hers in practice as well as law, not because she had fought to punish Daniel, because she refused to abandon the life she had built there. The nursery remained. The family photographs stayed on the walls. The garden outside the kitchen window slowly came back to life in spring. It was still the same house, but now it felt safe again. Daniel received a fair settlement. Nothing vindictive, nothing excessive. Emily never used her wealth as a weapon. She followed every court order, honored every agreement, protected their son's relationship with his father. The court recognized that. So did the people who watched the case unfold. Vanessa's future looked very different. Several professional relationships disappeared after messages connected to the affair surfaced during discovery proceedings. Investors became cautious. Opportunities dried up. She was not destroyed. But she was no longer welcomed into the circles she once believed she had mastered. Margaret struggled with the outcome more than anyone. For years, she had judged people by income status, titles, and appearances. Now she lived with the uncomfortable reality that the person she considered least valuable had been the most accomplished, most secure, and often the most gracious person in the family. The irony never left her. Neither did the regret. One afternoon, nearly a year later, Daniel stood outside the house to drop off his son after a scheduled visit. The exchange was polite, civil, nothing more. Before leaving, he hesitated. "I was wrong about a lot of things." Emily nodded. She appreciated the honesty, but honesty arrived too late to rebuild trust. Daniel looked toward the house, then toward her. "You never told me." Emily understood what he meant. The money, the inheritance, the hidden identity he never saw. A small smile touched her face. "You never asked." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Daniel quietly left. Emily watched his car disappear down the street. There was no triumph in the moment. No revenge. Only closure. Later that evening, she sat on the back porch holding her son while the sun slipped below the trees. The trust still existed. The family empire still existed. The wealth remained larger than she would ever need. But she finally understood something important. The inheritance had not saved her. Money had not restored her dignity. The lawyers had not healed her heart. She had survived because she learned her worth before anyone else was willing to see it. And once she understood that nobody could take it away again, the people who underestimated her never truly knew who she was. The people who loved her only after learning what she owned never truly loved her at all. As the evening settled around the quiet house, Emily kissed her son's forehead and smiled towards the future. And if this story left you thinking about someone who was judged too quickly or valued too little, feel free to share your thoughts below. Sometimes the people worth the most are the ones nobody bothers to understand until it's far too late.